Hello everyone, my name is Salvatore Di Costanzo and I am a local elder law and estate planning attorney with offices in Yorktown Heights and Rye, New York. And I'm pleased to be able to join everyone again today for the continuation of our remote video sessions. We've been doing these since we've been mandated to stay at home and work from home. And we've been bringing good topics to our audience and to our viewers. A lot of positive feedback from people on the different topics. A lot of good questions, and it's a great way to continue to share our knowledge with you from the comforts of your own home. We usually start off each of these Thursday sessions by thanking our frontline workers, all of our essential workers, everyone that's out there in the hospital settings, and also the non-hospital settings. There are a lot of people that have contributed to getting past this pandemic. We hope that we're pretty close to being past this pandemic. And we once again want to thank everybody who's helped our loved ones, whether it's to help them heal, or unfortunately in the case of the death of one of our loved ones, you've all been very supportive. And when we speak about these topics and the personalization that is needed during this time of crisis, it really creates a good segment for today's topic. And today I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Anthony Guarino, from Yorktown Funeral Home. He is the director of Yorktown Funeral Home, and he is also the director of Yanantuno. If anybody's from Down County, Yanantuno is in Mount Vernon, in the Fleetwood section of Mount Vernon. So he's got a northern presence and a southern presence, very similar to me, where I have a Yorktown office and a Rye office, right? And Anthony is coming out of obviously a tumultuous time in his career. I'd venture to say you've probably never seen anything like this before. And you've definitely been there for the community in the case of all the passing, all the loved ones that we've lost. And we want to thank you for being there to the community. You've been a great influence, especially up here in the northern Westchester community. So thank you for all of that, Anthony. And today what we're going to do is, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I see as an estate planning elder law attorney that parlay into the work that Anthony does. There's a lot of, when people do their estate planning, Anthony, everybody thinks that they need to just draft a will, or if I'm lucky, they'll draft a power of attorney, or maybe we'll talk about a trust. But the other side, or part of the estate planning process, is to really pay attention and put some time and thought into your wishes regarding your funeral, regarding your burial wishes. Perhaps you might have wishes regarding cremation versus traditional burial. Maybe you have somebody that wants to donate your organs. These are all things that should be thought through as part of the estate planning process. And I'll tell you, as an elder law attorney, a lot of people don't think about these things, right? So we're going to talk a little bit today about Anthony's experiences. And as we do that, I'm going to let Anthony take some of the stage here, but I'm going to educate you from a legal perspective as to how we can accomplish your goals and objectives. And we're going to talk a little bit about estate planning, and we're also going to talk a little bit about Medicaid planning. Because as an elder law attorney, one of the things that we do is we try to get people eligible for Medicaid in a nursing home context or for home care purposes. And we often talk to people about pre-planning funerals and things like that. So Anthony, why don't you start us off by just, if you want to tell us more about your practices, that's great. Maybe just a little bit. I'm sure a lot of people are interested in hearing about your experiences over the last, 12 weeks,
Sure.
Really. And then I'd like for you to start talking about some of the things that you've seen that people are not contemplating that cause problems from your perspective.
Absolutely, sure. I'd be happy to do that.
Please.
It's been a very difficult time these last several months. In the 40 years that I've been licensed funeral director in the state of New York here, I've never gone through 2 months as difficult as this was. And as difficult as it was for me, it was even more difficult for the families that came in to see me. They brought their husbands, their children, their wives, family members to a hospital. Were not permitted to go into the hospital.
That's right. That's right.
And then several days later were called and said, your family member has passed away. And they would come to me in a most difficult situation. And unfortunately, I mean, I did the best I could for them, but I was not able to have a wake or have them have that ability. Right. To have a wake and have closure because of everything going on.
Technical difficulty.
So,
Sorry about that, folks.
are you talking to you, Chris, as we're doing that?
Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, all right. So so it was a very difficult time for everyone who called us and had experienced this, and a lot of them are still traumatized by this and not able to get over it because it happened in such a fashion that they weren't able to be there, and they have no closure. So it's hopefully passing, as you said.
It's a tough time. Yeah.
It was a tough time. Hopefully everyone will be able to get over this, start to heal, and we'll never forget those who have passed and come through our doors. So.
I have a personal experience where we lost our aunt
Mm-hmm.
at a very young age to this.
Yeah.
And, the first time that we were able to see our aunt was at a very small, viewing,
Right.
where most of the family didn't even attend.
Right.
I'm sure our viewers are interested in knowing. I don't know the answer to this myself. Are we back to normal times? If somebody passes today, can you have a regular funeral today?
We can now post that we're having visitation hours. We're limited now to family members, 10 family members in a room, and then 10 guests can come in to pay their respects. When the 10 guests leave, then you can let 10 more people in.
Mm-hmm.
So we're limited, but it's something at least.
Right.
It's more than we were able to do before.
Right.
So it gives the family some closure and some ability to be together with us.
Sure.
So people can come and give their condolences.
Right.
So.
And we're now probably coming out of this.
And we're in phase 1, so it is better, and hopefully in the next month or so it will get even restrictions will be less.
That's right.
As we go forward.
That's right.
From what I can see, the virus is not nearly what it was. To the doctors that I speak to the nursing home practitioners that I speak to, the virus, the number of people who have the virus is very few.
Right.
So hopefully we're getting back to a better place.
Right. Well, hopefully, and thank you for everything you've done for everybody.
No, thank you.
So, some of the things that are interesting that parlay into, from what I do to what you do, are when people come to you to arrange for their loved ones, funeral arrangements or the burial arrangements, and they may not necessarily have the legal authority to make certain arrangements.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to things like cremation, for instance.
Right.
Why don't you talk to us a little bit about your experiences as a funeral director, and then I'll come in later on and talk about some of the legal documents that we can put in place to make sure that certain issues don't occur. But I can only imagine that you've got some good experiences dealing with families that may not potentially are in disagreement as to people's burial remains. Perhaps the person has never enunciated their wishes, and different types of burial arrangements, whether it's traditional burial, cremation. But cremation is a little bit more particular.
It is a little bit more particular. Once cremation is done, it obviously cannot be undone. So there is a legal order of people who can authorize cremation, and there are documents that I have families sign, and they need to be able to prove that they are in the line of succession.
That's right.
So the first person who has the right is the person who was given written permission
That's
to
right.
make that decision.
That's right.
So, for instance, I had a man who was his partner died, and they They lived together for 35 years, well in their 80s. And so he called me and he said, well, she wanted to be cremated. And I said, you know, are you legally together or just living together? He said, no, we just live together. But I know her wishes. I've been with her for 35 years. We're in our 80s. This is what she wanted. And I had to tell him that you couldn't be the one to sign it.
That's right.
You know, but she didn't have any family. She was a single person. Obviously, parents were all gone, no children, no brothers or sisters. She had some cousins from out of state, but you know, really, that was it.
That's right.
And it took time to find somebody. It's very difficult. Now, had he called and he had spoken to either yourself or us at the funeral home, we would have advised him that you know, a document, an instrument giving him permission to authorize the cremation, he would have had the authority to do it. Without that written document, he had no power. There's the other situations where this comes into play is if someone wants to be cremated and they have children. Some children don't want the cremation. Some children want the cremation. Well, all the children have equal authority. So either you get them all to sign, or the cremation doesn't happen.
Yeah. So let me explain to our viewers just exactly what we're talking about from a legal perspective. What Anthony is referencing is actually statutory. We have a statute in New York State under the public health law. I think it's like section 4201 or something like that. That talks about burial remains.
Right.
And so in New York State, what Anthony is referring to is completely accurate. In order for Anthony as a funeral director to take instructions, there's a hierarchy of people that can provide those instructions. And number one on the list is the agent appointed by a written instrument. We call that a burial remains form. The same way you've heard me talk about a power of attorney or a healthcare proxy, the burial remains form is used in a similar fashion.
Right.
You can draft a document that appoints someone to be your representative from a burial remains perspective. Right. And in that document, our videographer is having
technical difficulty. I am
today,
so sorry.
I apologize. But in that same document, you can be specific as to what your wishes are.
Correct.
Whether it's cremation, traditional burial, organ donation, and maybe you've seen things that I've never seen before. And so you can do all that. Most people don't have that form.
No, that's exactly right.
And so a few years back, and maybe it's more than a few years back, we had this burial remains legislation that, in the infinite wisdom of everybody out there, we said, wait a minute, most people don't have this form. These issues are arising on a regular basis. We need to put something in place so that way there's a hierarchy of individuals that can make these decisions. So in the burial remains statute, it talks about the first person is under a form, a written instrument. But most of the time we don't have it. So then it goes to a spouse.
Right.
And then a subset of spouse is domestic partner.
Correct.
Somebody that is, a non-traditional marriage is being recognized today, as we all know. So you can take instructions from a domestic partner.
Correct.
But just living with somebody and not rising to the level of a domestic partner, just being a relative that lives with, that doesn't necessarily fall into the hierarchy of people that can make decisions, unless it's a child and so forth and so on.
Now, is it true that common law is not recognized in the state of New York?
Well, common law may be recognized. Usually we look to a statute and then case law, and common law is usually interpreted through the cases.
Okay.
So that's, I don't know if you have a particular question.
Well, with that with common law
Marriages are not recognized in New York State. So
okay.
that's
all right.
so
that's
when
the question.
I just answered you from a law school perspective,
Yes.
but common law marriages are not recognized in New York State.
Okay.
Now I'm not a matrimonial attorney, so if I said anything incorrectly, please feel free to correct me, matrimonial law attorneys, but that's my belief. Now, you said something before, though, that I think is really important, because it's what was going through my mind when I was, thinking about this topic. What happens when you have children that disagree with each other? Under the statute, you can't act until you get a court order.
If not everyone agrees, and the children are just strongly disagreeing amongst each other, I just won't do the cremation.
You just won't do the cremation?
Yeah, I mean, then they have to make a decision that
right.
I'll bury. We'll do a burial.
So now you just said something else that's extremely important. Explain to the viewers, why are we so focused on cremation versus burial?
Okay.
It's a very easy answer that I didn't figure out on my own. You had to tell me.
Yeah, it's cremation. Once that's done, it cannot be undone. With burial, if a family member comes up and wants to exhume the remains, he has the right to do that. He or she has the right to do that.
Right.
So once cremation takes place and the body is cremated, turned to ash. That's it.
There's no turning back.
There's no turning back.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I want everybody to understand that if you have particular wishes and you want to make sure that your wishes are carried out, you don't want to leave it to the devices of your family members to make those decisions without written documentation.
Correct.
Take the time to work with an elder law attorney to write down your wishes. I was telling Anthony about a case that I was involved with years ago where this particular person wanted to be buried with his pets. And there are cemeteries that allow that. Right? And we took some time to draft that in a burial remains form, so that way there's no questions. There's no questions being asked.
Correct.
When the time comes, we can carry out that person's wishes. So it's very important to put your wishes in writing, because it's not uncommon, Anthony, right? When somebody passes, the emotional level is off the charts. We're going to get into talking just now in a bit about pre-planning.
Yes.
The reason why we tell people to pre-plan is not only for Medicaid planning purposes, but because it's better to plan and make your decisions while you are of sound mind. There's no pressure.
Exactly.
You're not leaving it to your family members who are grieving. I think you'd probably be able to concur with me, and you can clearly, say more about this than I can. For somebody to have to make very intimate decisions at a time when they just lost a loved one, it's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
It's not easy.
They don't. It's not a time for you to be making decisions. I have probably over 300 families who have come in to the funeral home up here in Yorktown, and who have made pre-arrangements with us. And they do it for various reasons. One, they don't want the burden of the responsibility to be left upon their children. Their children live out of town, and they don't want that pressure to be on them to fly back and to make those arrangements. And they have specific ideas about what they want for a funeral. Mm-hmm. So they will both come down and sit with me and talk about exactly what they want, and I write it up and I have it on a file.
Right.
Some of them are prepaid, some are not prepaid. Some are just express their wishes, what they want for the funeral. But it also, and in a segue to going on Medicaid, when the people do come in and they make a revocable trust, that trust can be turned into an irrevocable trust if need be.
That's right.
And that's big. That's very important.
So let's be very clear. When Anthony uses the word trust, he's not referring to a trust that I would draft as an attorney. He's not referring to the typical Medicaid trust that I draft, or the living trust, which is also known as a revocable trust that avoids probate. We've done videos on this.
No.
So I feel like I'm talking to my class, right? What Anthony is referring to is a pre-planned and prepaid, possibly, burial arrangement, which is, it can be revocable or it can be irrevocable. So it's a burial trust under New York state law, but it's not, the word trust gets used very loosely.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to make it very clear that we're not talking about the type of trust that we draft from an estate plan perspective. But we do use these on a regular basis. And before we get into the planning reasons behind it, I'll tell you, so often family members come to me after somebody's passed and there was a pre-planned and prepaid funeral. And the very first thing that they do is they thank me for making that recommendation.
Yes.
Purely on the basis of what we just talked about. I didn't have to think about anything.
Correct.
All I had to do was grieve.
Yep.
Right? Even when everything is in order, even when all the moon and the stars are aligned, it's still a difficult process to plan a funeral, even with a close-knit family.
Absolutely.
I remember my mom passed away last year. You go from the hospital setting to the funeral home setting to then having to pick out cards and to do this. Now, and again, I wouldn't be able to, the fact that I had a funeral director that, at that time really worked wonders for myself, my sister. If you don't have that right person on the other side of the fence to walk you through this process, it's a traumatic experience.
It's traumatic, absolutely.
And there are, not every, somebody once said to me, there are attorneys and then there are attorneys.
Right.
Well, I bet you could say that about funeral directors.
Yes,
You don't always have the greatest, most reputable funeral director, but you don't know that as a family member, right? So it's very important to try to sit down in advance and do some of these things. Now, when do I see that as an elder law attorney? Well, when we're doing Medicaid planning, right? And some of the things that I just want to make it known to the audience is that you are allowed to visit somebody like Anthony and pre-plan and prepay a funeral. That arrangement needs to be irrevocable from a Medicaid perspective. That's why you were saying before that sometimes people do revocable arrangements and then they can turn them into irrevocable arrangements.
Correct.
For Medicaid planning purposes, it needs to be irrevocable. Now, I'm curious, why do people set up revocable arrangements?
Well, unless you're going on Medicaid, you can't set up an irrevocable.
Okay.
So the good thing about a revocable trust, and I think this is something everyone should know, is we do this as a courtesy to the families to set up these pre-plans. We receive nothing from the pre-plan until we perform the service. So what happens, families come in and we don't keep the money. The money is not held at the funeral home. The money is held into a trust account.
This is very good information.
And these trust accounts are set up interest bearing. We guarantee as a funeral home that the interest will take care of any increase in cost. So if a funeral happens 10 years from now or 15 years from now, the interest that's in there, we guarantee will take care of any increase that takes place.
And the trust account is managed by New York State.
It's actually by the New York State Funeral Directors.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. So the interest rate, there is $500,000 a month that goes into that account from funeral homes throughout the state of New York.
Right.
Each account is FDIC insured, so the money is always yours, and the money is transferable. If you pick up and you move to California, that money goes with you. That trust stays with you. You never lose it. Not all states have such good laws as New York.
Right.
For instance, Florida. Florida, some of the funeral homes in Florida keep the money. If they go out of business, the money goes away.
So you really have to check the laws of the state that you're going to.
Correct.
And that may be a reason to revoke it. So presumably, if you move from New York to Florida, and the laws may not be as favorable in Florida, you might want to revoke it or do something else.
Or leave it here in New York because you know it's always safe, and you can use it in Florida.
Oh, interesting.
So just because you make it an arrangement at one funeral home doesn't mean you need to stay there.
That's right.
You can always go to any other funeral home and use that irrevocable trust.
So if somebody plans a funeral today and picks out a casket, flower arrangement, I'm not, prayer cards, all that, and dies 20 years from now, and the costs have doubled, they're not paying the increase. The interest, you're guaranteeing that on the interest.
Correct.
So it's, if you want to leverage time against your funeral cost,
That's the way to do it.
It makes sense to plan early.
Yeah. And understand that once that money's put there, if tough times come along and you need the money back, it's your money. You just,
Right.
you just write a letter to the trust, and you receive the money back with the interest.
Right. And so what Anthony was saying before is, if you need to apply for Medicaid, that's when we would turn it into an irrevocable arrangement.
Correct.
And I've actually been involved in cases where the funeral director has told the person that it can't be turned into an irrevocable. But I don't know what eventually we got it turned into an irrevocable.
Sure.
But I've had that happen to me before. Now Medicaid allows you to take money and pre-plan a funeral. There's no penalty for transferring those assets.
Correct.
And what a lot of people don't know, and this is actually a really good planning technique that we've implemented before, Medicaid has a rule that says you can pre-plan and prepay your funeral, but also the funeral of your spouse and your children. There's actually a tree that goes out where it's not only you. So I had this case once where we commenced a guardianship proceeding because the person had no capacity and they were in a nursing home. And after the guardianship was commenced and approved, we then applied for Medicaid in the nursing home context, and we had like $60,000 on the table, right? It's not enough money to do any kind of sophisticated planning, but it was enough money that we didn't really want to lose.
Right. And
we pre-planned a funeral for multiple people in the family that pretty much ate up the $60,000. And it was a great planning strategy.
Sure.
Now we were planning funerals for young people, which, I joked before by saying, you want to leverage, but you usually don't see young people pre-planning their funerals. In this case, we did. And we were able to use up the $60,000 and get this person on Medicaid. It was a great success story.
That is good.
So that's what you need to know from a legal perspective and from a Medicaid planning perspective. So these are some really good topics, Anthony, and as a funeral director, I'm sure, your experience comes in probably often from a negative side of the equation, as people might be fighting, people don't have the proper documents in place, people have not pre-planned, and you have to deal with all those emotions.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's very valuable for you to share that with us today, and understand that there's a link between the legal process and the funeral process. A lot of people, I'm sure you see it just like I do, people don't want to think about death and dying and taxes, and I happen to be an accountant as well, and so I've got to come from all different angles, right? But you're no different than I am,
No.
right?
That's right.
People don't want to think about these things, but they really should.
Yeah.
Right. And so, with that being said, is there any other advice that you can give our viewers in closing? I want you to tell everybody how they can reach you.
Okay.
Right. Maybe somebody will take our advice and pre-plan, but also just for a good resource in the community. I think people should know who you are and where to find you.
Well, good. Thank you. We are here in Yorktown at 945 East Main Street in Shrub Oak. We've been here for 10 years now, and the community has really accepted us very nicely. We're also in Mount Vernon. I've been in Mount Vernon for almost 40 years at the Ann Antonio Davis Sharp Funeral Home on Gramerton Avenue in the Fleetwood section of Mount Vernon. That's where I actually began my career. And
Those are your old stomping grounds.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it's I've spent a long time doing this, and we do the best we can for every family that comes in through the door. My suggestion is come talk to us, or come talk to any funeral director, or go to multiple funeral directors and see who you're comfortable with, and talk to them and make a decision. You don't have to prepay anything. You could just put your wishes down on paper, So when the time comes, your family will have some direction. It may not seem important. It may not, maybe think that you're too young. But if you have children and you want to take the burden off of them, it's a good thing to do. Good thing to come and talk to us and have those things written down.
And I concur. And I can only concur because of what I hear from my clients that have come back and said thank you. Right? It really takes a burden off.
It does.
The family.
It does.
Now, you have a website, you have a phone number.
We do. And in Yorktown here, it's 914-962-0700. And our website is yorktownfh.com. You're welcome to go on there. There's some good information about pre-planning that you may want to see there. In Mount Vernon, we're at 914-699-4010. And we are at the Yanantono funeralhome.com website. And there's also some good information there as well.
And
Question.
we have a question.
Yes.
So
Does it?
I was just about to sign off, but
Sorry.
it's a good thing.
First of all, you did get a compliment. This is indeed great planning strategy. Does it make a difference if you have life insurance?
Well, that's a good question, Anthony, and you probably want to talk about that. I have seen clients name the funeral home as the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. And you can, we've done that in Medicaid planning context, et cetera. But have you ever dealt with life insurance?
I have dealt. People who have come in have made their pre-arrangements and plan to use their life insurance policy as a form of payment. We at Yorktown Funeral Home and in Mount Vernon at Yanantono Funeral Home accept checks, credit cards, or insurance assignments.
That's right.
So, and we do the paperwork for the insurance, and most times within 2 or 3 weeks, the insurance company pays the bill.
I think that's what they're probably referring to.
And it's important for the family that they know that they don't have to worry about coming up with money. They could use their insurance policy.
It sort of ties together some of the things that I've talked about in the past with beneficiary designations. After we're done drafting an estate plan, we want to make sure that the beneficiary designations are in order. Because you might have an estate plan that says one thing and a beneficiary designation that says another. Same thing with life insurance. If you are somebody that purchased a $10,000 life insurance policy and the purpose of that policy is solely for your burial, for your funeral and burial process, you probably want to make sure, instead of that money going to your next of kin, and then who knows, things happen, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that it's not going to happen. Things happen. Families say, oh, my kids they'll spend the money. My husband. Well, what happens if you have a life insurance policy and your husband is the beneficiary, and then your husband is in a nursing home on Medicaid, and nobody ever changes the beneficiary designation? Now you've lost that money to the nursing home.
To the nursing home, right.
Meanwhile, you're planning on using those life insurance proceeds to pay for your funeral. So Anthony is saying that he can accept an assignment of that life insurance policy.
Correct.
If that policy is designated for your burial, you should attend to that now.
Right.
Pre-plan your funeral and assign that policy to Anthony now, so that way it's all taken care of, right? And we don't have any issues. You also have to be careful. A lot of people buy life insurance for these reasons, but the cash value of a life insurance policy is an available resource for Medicaid planning purposes.
Correct.
So if I have a $30,000 cash value life insurance policy because it was purchased years ago and the cash value built up, I might have to cash that out to do the Medicaid plan.
Right.
And depending on what we end up doing with that life insurance, I may not have it anymore, right? So it's very technical from a legal perspective. And what I'm trying to get our audience to understand week after week is that it's not simple. You just don't go and draft your own will, your own power of attorney, and all these little nuances that a lot of people don't realize can really bite you at the end of the day.
That's exactly right.
So with that being said, I'm going to end this video conference, tell you that I really enjoy doing this, and if you like this, I'd appreciate if you would share it with your friends, your family, on Facebook. We also put these videos on our website. Anthony, you can do the same if you're so inclined.
Absolutely. My
website's planned today for tomorrow. You can see this video and all the prior videos are there too. And if you want to reach out to us to do your planning, our phone number is 914-925-1010 in the Rye office and 914-245-2440 in the Yorktown office. And I look forward to continuing these video sessions with you. And if there are any questions after today, they can email you, Anthony.
Absolutely.
You can email me, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. So if there are no other questions now, I'm going to bid farewell and wish everybody the best of health and stay safe. Take care.